base in northern Afghanistan. These photos surfaced online and appear to show the vehicles the terrorists used. Afghan military officials say at least 50 soldiers were killed. The assault began during Friday prayers at a mosque at the base. Local journalist Bilal Sarwari gave us the details.
At least 10 attackers wearing Afghan National Army uniforms arrived at the main Afghan military base for northern Afghanistan. They were pretending to be members of the Afghan National Army. They were just wearing the same uniforms. They had fake ID cards. When they were asked, as is the procedure, to hand over their weapons so they can take their wounded soldiers for treatment, this is when they shot dead an Afghan National Army officer. Then they drove to a second checkpoint, a second layer of security, where one of the attackers detonated his suicide jacket. This is when the rest of the attackers, driving in two Afghan National Army vehicles, headed towards the mosque and towards the dining hall. Today was Friday, so there was a big Friday prayer ceremony, and a lot of the soldiers and officers, they were not armed. They were just out there praying or eating their lunch. So it has been described to me as a massacre. To the best of my knowledge, this is probably the first time that this tactic has been applied. Now, a spokesman for the Taliban put out a statement. They said that they were behind this attack. We'll have to wait and hear more. But one thing is sure, this is a base where Afghan soldiers and officers should have been safe. This is a base with several layers of security. This is yet...
As you can see there, man, that's crazy. Now, I would not be surprised at all if Trump launches some sort of attack on the Taliban, who are right now fighting the Afghan-funded army, which the United States funds the Afghan army. And we are fighting the Taliban and ISIS, but ISIS is being fought by the Taliban, so sometimes we will actually fund little offshoot groups, if you will, of different, so they're not officially the Taliban. They're little different groups of jihadists who will kill ISIS members, and sometimes, they'll surrender without being killed, or at first, then they probably do get killed, and then ISIS has our weapons to use against our allies and enemies, or allies and their enemies. So this is pretty nuts, actually, the way they were able to pull this off. And like they said, that was probably the first time this was ever a tactic applied, which would not surprise me. I mean, that's a pretty ballsy move on the first place. I mean, I know they're jihadists and they don't care for life, but it shows, yes, like he said, a lack of intelligence capabilities, especially at a military base that's supposed to be so highly, protected. And they said they made it through multiple checkpoints, so they had obviously planned this out. This was not a spur-of-the-moment attack by any means, and unfortunately 50 soldiers lost their lives who were, like they said, just praying or eating lunch, and it's just another example of why we need to get out of the Middle East. These problems will never stop, especially while we keep toppling these regimes and propping up false dictators or faux democracies. And, then, of course, we will have to stay around while there's all these jihadist groups that linger and form after you establish a new government, especially when your government was the one responsible for killing many of their family members. And I'm not trying to sound so anti-American here as much as I am from a logical and empathetic standpoint. I'm not saying I feel bad for terrorists, but I can empathize with somebody whose family was killed by a U.S. drone strike and hating the U.S. It's a rational emotion to have of, getting vengeance. And so, you know, terrorism is a vicious cycle because it's only propagated through fear. And the only way that the terrorists are able to, have any power in the first place is because we give them the attention in our mainstream media and in our dialogue, especially when it comes to politics, when radical Islamic terrorism does not affect our country nearly as much as you would think by watching the news. I mean, we've had a few horrible attacks like the Orlando shooter, but I mean, in the 911 call released, his whole reason for shooting up the nightclub, and I'm not defending his actions at all, but again, he was on the phone and he was begging the operator to have the U.S. stop bombing Syria and Afghanistan, I believe. It was another Middle Eastern country, Syria and Yemen maybe. And it's just, it shows you, man, like whenever you go, you can't, like I've said a million times, you can't fight a war, you can't win a war of ideas with guns and bullets and drone strikes and missiles and near nuclear bombs. The Moab that was, you know, just paraded through the mainstream media. You had people like Brian Williams saying it was beautiful and referred it to a poem he had read. So it's, man, you just see the war machine keep turning. The military industrial complex keeps making money. There's, only one way you can make money off of producing as much weaponry as the United States does, and that's by making sure that somewhere in some place there's a war going on or a conflict where people are in need of this ammo or supplies. I mean, that's why we give Saudi Arabia these, billion-dollar bids on weapons deals, and just let them bomb the shit out of the Yemenis people who are, and then literally starving millions of them to death as I say this right now. They cut off all the supplies, they've blocked the ports. They're starving these people to death. And you don't hear a fucking word about it on the mainstream media. So just, whenever you hear terrorism brought up in a conversation, just think about the real dangers in your life, the things that are really likely to harm you, and focus on that and improving those aspects of your life. We still need to deal with terrorism, and I'm not defending any terrorist. But when we go over there and we kill innocent civilians, we are, in our own definition, terrorists. We are, killing innocent civilians for a political or religious motivated cause. I mean, we killed 90% civilians in the 20,000 bombs we dropped on Syria last year under Barack Obama. Now, Donald Trump has increased our drone strikes in Syria by 426%. In his first drone strike, he killed Anwar al-Awlaki's daughter, I believe. She's an 8-year-old American citizen. There's like little pictures of her. It's the cutest little girl. And we killed, I don't remember the exact numbers, but we killed like 34 civilians, I think, in that bombing alone. His first military, that disaster in Yemen, where we lost one of our own troops. His name escapes me right now, forgive me. I know his father was opposed to Trump sending him in. Ryan Owens, perhaps? If I get that wrong, like I said, please forgive me. it's not his fault that he died. He was sent into a mission doing what he signed up for. And, you know, whoever the commander-in-chief is, they are the ones who we have to obey if we're in our military. So, Donald Trump isn't cut it to be a corporal or a sergeant or a general. And if you think he's qualified to be the president, take a look at what he's done. Take a look at the policies he's really pushing for. Look at who he's appointed to his cabinet. I think we have 6 people from Goldman Sachs, including their president and CEO, Steve Mnuchin, who got a $1 billion severance bonus, if I'm not mistaken. It could be multi-million, but I'm pretty sure it was like a couple billion. And we have people like Betsy DeVos, whose brother was the founder of Blackwater. And Blackwater was a group of mercenaries hired by the United States in Afghanistan, I believe, to conduct military operations. But it's not our military because, we're not sending our troops on the ground, our boots on the ground. It's private companies. And these billionaires, the DeVos's, they all have a bunch of money. And funny enough, the same guy who was in Blackwater now has his sister running our